There are a ton. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's broad issues, global capitalism. There's these. What I find really kind of funny is, and I call this, I call attention to this in a lot of the forums, is this wanting to have our cake and eat it too perspective, where people demand affordability, yet also like demand, expansion and endless, ceaseless growth. And also, they want sort of to alleviate, they're like, well, we have poverty in our town and, low income people getting pushed out. And it's like, yeah, global capitalism does depend on having an impoverished workforce, or no one else they don't wage slave away because they like it, and like you have people demanding affordable housing, yet they want to keep paying major corporations to come to town. And, low income people aren't going to go get the $80,000 job at Apple. They're going to be dealing with the drain on the infrastructure or the extra traffic or the increase in property taxes or whatever comes after that. There's some that are local. There are some that are sort of global, and then you just kind of feel them locally. And then there's a lot of things that are sort of a mix of the two. If you want to look at something that's specifically kind of local, we have like one of the things I'm interested in is the Fayette coal plant. Um, Now, I guess that's also a global issue because you have to think about emissions and where they go. Now, Austin Energy owns half of the Fayette coal plant, and obviously, using coal is an extremely dirty energy source. But beyond that, it also makes sick the people of Fayette. There's been issues with coal ash leaking into the groundwater there, and there are pecan orchards there that suffer from that. And the way I always kind of look at these things is offensive rights versus defensive rights. And I think the status quo opinion is that we just kind of have the right to electricity at any cost, at any time, in any quantity, despite how it may negatively impact other people. Whereas I would take the opposite position and say, you don't get to just have that if it means making other people ill or destroying an ecosystem that, people and other, non-humans rely on. Think outside the box and just entertain an idea really quickly. Um, I would suggest that, especially starting in East Austin and Southeast Austin, and especially sort of this, these like outskirts where we find the much higher levels of poverty that exist in our town, um, there's going to be a lot of open land out there, and there's going to be underused or even unused structures. And I think if we take these and if we actually, in an organized fashion, distribute them to the people who actually live in those communities, you could start creating a system where people can be growing their own food and starting permaculture, organic farms. Connected to those could be cooperatively owned businesses. So, let's just take a hypothetical and say you have an area where there's a large, multi-acre lot with like a warehouse type structure on it. If you find a way to give that to the people who live within a certain radius of it, and have these people who are interested in participating, anyone who's interested comes out, have some organizational meetings, uh, and then figure out what it is they'd like to see happen there, so it's not kind of forced upon them. But if you could bring them sort of the training to start growing food on that land and selling it in that structure, then you can have a cooperatively owned business where the people right there in that community don't have to go far to go to work. So that reduces travel uh, and use of road infrastructure. And it reduces the need to travel somewhere else to get food. And there's this concept of the food desert, which I'm sure you're aware of, where in impoverished communities, there aren't, Whole Foods isn't over there. They want to eat. If they want to go get nutritious food, they have to take a long bus ride somewhere, which becomes really impossible. So they end up eating fast food and convenience store food, which is more expensive, takes a huge toll on their health. You can start eliminating a lot of these problems just by giving people back the world in which they live. That's a complex question. Complex questions typically have many sides that need viewing. It's been said that the money that Austin Energy raises that goes into the general fund should stay with Austin Energy so they do not need to raise rates. If that is a possibility, that would be amazing. At the same time, um, there are certain things people have to accept. Like if you move to a really, really hot space, like Central Texas, which is just getting hotter because of our industrial activity, you're going to need, if you desire to cool that place down to 70 degrees on a 110-degree day, it you don't have a right for it to be cheap. Now, if we want to start doing things in a more responsible fashion, we could look at sort of the Austin Beyond Coal plan, the plans to get decentralized solar going and start working so we can have you know these things done, have the power to keep people at least safe and comfortable, but not by not using the money from Austin Energy and putting it into the general fund and spending it on other things, spending it on working towards sort of an independence from fossil fuels and hopefully keeping energy prices low. It's called the ratchet effect. And once we have something, we can't fathom going backwards, right? And not having it. So once someone has had um, their house in the suburbs and they drove to their job downtown 10 years ago and they were able to make that drive every day in 10 minutes with, $1.50 a gallon gasoline, when those roads are now full of traffic because we've overdeveloped and because of issues internationally and globally, it's more expensive to even take that ride. Those people think that the previous state is what is the normal. Sustainable means the ability to do something indefinitely. So indefinitely, which means basically forever, or at least as long as we're around. Um, Automobiles, roads, power plants, everything we eat, everything we wear, everything we use being imported on, driven in on diesel trucks from somewhere else, typically around the world. Like that's not sustainable. It never will be sustainable. And the thing that what a city is it's a population center that is uh, outgrown the ability of the local land base to support it. So, like for instance, if you live in a small rural community, that could be sustainable because you could potentially grow enough food there, get enough water there to take care of everybody who lives there. A city can't do that. It requires imports, which requires, in the modern age, fossil fuels, and also attached to that, sort of global violence. I really need to see what that all entailed. I'm originally from Chicago. I've seen urban rail be really sort of successful in an area. Now, it was also something that was always financially sort of unviable. The CTA was always scraping for more money and threatening to shut down lines at different times. Um, and they often had to go to Springfield, to the capital, to get money. So the people in Southern Illinois were paying for Chicago's rails, like local subways. But they also had the Metro Rail, which was a privately owned rail that went out to sort of the suburbs and stuff, and that worked fairly well. Do I support it here in Austin? Let me say this: I've also lived in Phoenix, and I've seen them just introduce their light rail there, and it's been extremely popular so far. I am 100% indifferent. I self-identify as an anarchist. I don't believe in sort of central planning, leaders. People don't need to be led. And it's kind of silly, like 7 people trying to represent 800,000 is going to be just as farcical if it's 10 people or 12 people. And, even if one of them lives 5 blocks from you. What I really think we need to talk about is participation. And, and that doesn't mean voting. That means actually participating in the world around you, not just clicking like on Facebook or watching TV when you get home from work. And are we trying to change the way we vote for people to ultimately change the thinking and methodology at City Hall? Or are we trying